of the audiences asked me about what painter it was that I was referring to earlier when I talked about the artist working with a palette knife and making use of this. It is Art de Gelder, there's one painting in one of the back rooms of Art de Gelder next to a painting by Robert Flink. But it's Art de Gelder, who is a brilliant painter and student of Rembrandt, who very often uses a palette knife when he paints, in combination with brushes. Well, having talked now about Rembrandt, I thought it would be nice to talk about one of Rembrandt's other brilliant pupils, Carl Fabritius. Carl Fabritius, who has also been seen as a painter of light, who moved to Delft after having trained with Rembrandt, and therefore he has often been associated with having influenced Johannes Vermeer in the way that he paints light or paints his interiors in the second half of the 17th century. Rembrandt had several pupils. Many of them we only know the names. Some of them we know their paintings. And on the other hand, knowing their paintings, we cannot know exactly what their paintings looked like when they were working together with Rembrandt. With Carl Fabritius, whose painting you see in the middle, a self-portrait, we have no evidence so far of any of his works while he was still in Rembrandt's studio. Maybe some of the paintings that are thought to be by Rembrandt, but research has shown they are not by Rembrandt, by somebody else, could be also by Fabritius or any of the other painters. So there's still a lot to be found out, not only about this particular studio of Rembrandt's, which had such a big turnover of students, but in many other of the workshops of both the 16th, 17th, and 18th century artistic centers or workshops have produced, of course, students and apprentices that works in ways that we still need to discover to see how they worked when they were with the master himself. To the very right, on this front image, you have a painting by Johannes Vermeer. As you can see, this painting is normally hanging in Dresden, where it belongs to the collection, and it's the first painting that is signed and dated 1655 or 1656, I believe it is. So that's the earliest painting we know by Vermeer's hand. The painting here is a self-portrait by Rembrandt with a funny hat. He paints himself with a lot of hats, and it's hanging in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston in the United States. When Fabritius started as a student in Rembrandt's workshop, Rembrandt was painting works like this. He was only in Rembrandt's workshop for 2 years, or approximately 2 years, from 42 to 43, and he saw this, which is a double, the big painting is a double portrait of a merchant and his wife, sitting here with all his books about trades with ships, which is almost like the anatomy lesson, as you can see. It's the portrait painter applying his knowledge of space and movement and history painting into a double portrait where he seems to explain to his wife what is happening next in his business. And at the same time, you have a Bathsheba bathing, a mythological painting explaining stories about love, nakedness, and people spying on her, and all kinds of stories that one can associate. So he's trying to mix all this together, and this is what the young Fabritius sees. And Fabritius must also have been in the studio when Rembrandt created the Night Watch. It is still being investigated if there are more hands than Rembrandt's hand in this painting. And could some of the other hands, in the sense of brushworks, assistants, have been Fabritius in this painting? We don't know for sure. But it is conceivable that he might have participated in the creation of this huge canvas. Anyhow, we can see that when Fabritius starts his career, he starts also out with history paintings. He wants to become the best that the painters could have and aspire to, a history painter, that one that paints out of his mind. And actually Samuel van Hoogstraten is a writer from the Netherlands who in 1678 publishes a book about artists and painting techniques of the artists. And he writes at one point that the history painter or the good painter, he reads, he studies, and he develops complete concept of the image within his head. And like a scene in front of a theater, he draws away the curtains and he starts to paint when his story is finished. And this is what the history painter must do, because he's not looking after an image to copy. He's trying to get this out. And what you see here is Christ and Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus, where a number of the figures here around, like this figure here, could resemble some of the figures you see in this painting. It's as if and that has been speculated as well, could this be an homage to Rembrandt? Is this a little portrait of Rembrandt in 1642? It's pure speculation, and as we do not know what the truth is, we are free to speculate and make stories as much as we want to. But also this is a huge canvas, slightly smaller canvas here in Salzburg, and the study we made in front of an exhibition on Fabricius was to understand what happened within the just 12 years that this artist was active in the world, because he died very young. He had worked in Middenbeemster, it's a town in Holland, until 42. What he did before, we don't know. Then he was in Amsterdam, where he trained with Rembrandt. These 2.5 years, he was in Amsterdam and 2 years with Rembrandt. Then he was back in his town where he was born and worked there for another 7 years. And then he left for Delft, where he lived for 4 years. And then he dies in 54. And he produced 12 paintings that we know of. There might be more paintings out there, but so far we only know of 12 paintings by his hand. So it's a very little and very narrow oeuvre that he produced. And of those are 10 canvases and 2 panels. So here we have some of the paintings, and they vary extremely much in size. You have large paintings on canvas, portraits on canvas, self-portrait here on canvas, small painting on panel, another small painting on panel, that vary very much. Starting off with large paintings, ambitions to be a history painter, ending off with small, delicate interiors over those only 12 years. So there's a big change happening, and the format of his paintings are also changing extremely much. You can see the raising of Lazarus, which was the biggest, the first I showed you, and then you have here the coordinate with the small Goldfinch, and you have even smaller paintings down here, which is just about 15 by 35 centimeters. So it's a huge range, and as time progresses, they become smaller and smaller. Very much parallel with the artist I'm talking about after this, about Johannes Vermeer. He does exactly the same. Starts off with large-scale history paintings and ends up with small paintings of domestic interiors. This painting here has been attributed to Fabricius, and it is extremely close to the style and manner of Rembrandt. It has a ground layer that is comparable to, or almost identical to, the quartz grounds that I talked about in the previous lecture. This quartz ground, this ground that was used also on the Night Watch for the first time, which so far has only been associated with paintings carried out in the studio of Rembrandt. So this could be the very first paintings actually, but it's not confirmed, and it's only so far as per speculation. It has normally been attributed to Rembrandt, like many other paintings of this type. But there's something wrong, according to the art historians, in the way the brush handle and the light falls, so it could be a cautious attribution to Fabricius. In the Lazarus painting, the raising of Lazarus, we see that there's a two-layered ground, a warm ground over a red, just a fragment of the red, and then there's a warm gray. And that is a combination that we see a lot in Rembrandt's paintings, a combination that we also saw in the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, with the red base, the gray buff, the warm gray, and then the paint layers on top. Hagar and the Angel, which was the other large-scale mythological painting, has also a slightly warmer buff-colored ground. We are talking about the 40s and the 50s, these two decennias only. There's a self-portrait supposed to be by Fabricius in Munich. I don't know why I don't have an image here, but it is a self-portrait that will come later on, I believe. It has a white ground, completely white ground, not chalk ground, but white paint, lead white paint ground, which is kind of odd. And there's a portrait of the potter. We will return to this guy, which is again a light beige over an orange first layer, which is changing the composition of the ground layer again. So there are these subtle changes of the composition of the ground. And then you have his late self-portrait from the 1654, the year he dies. And there you have a different build-up of the ground, which has large aggregates of lead white in and chalk, and also applied with a brush. The reason this is mentioned, applied with a brush, is that there were essentially two main ways to apply the ground layer to a canvas. One was with a large palette knife, where you would simply scrape it over the canvas, and another would be to apply it with a larger brush. The different colors of the ground layers are important to understand the general tonality of the painting, the finished painting, because the ground layer is like the backboard in a piano. It makes resonance to the tones that you put down on the tangents. So with a warm ground, you get a warmer painting. You can choose a cooler layer, and you would have a brighter or cooler painting finally. Artists know this very well. Interior images are by some artists often painted on a darker ground than, for instance, a seascape with ships on the ocean. Where there's a lot of light and sky, they would use a cooler ground to support the idea of light in the outside. We see this change also in Fabricius's paintings between subjects, but it could also reflect that he is living in different towns. It is so that you in this period, in the early 17th century and onwards, already can begin to buy ready-made canvases already prepared with ground. So the color may also reflect the producer of the ready-made canvases with ground layer that the artist would buy in different towns or by different liveransiers in the city where they live. They may not be determined by the artist himself. And this is something that is making us cautious about making interpretations about the ground as an aid to understand an artist's attribution. One has to be very careful about this, nevertheless. There's another issue that I just wanted to mention, that the size of a painting on panel or on canvas would also reflect the different cities in which an artist would work. Because before the Napoleon Wars, before 1799 essentially, there was not a uniform metric system in Northern and Western Europe. Each town would actually have its own measurement. It would be called the same, but it might not necessarily be entirely the same width or length. So what was before a meter was an L. An L could be divided into inches, and sometimes an L was divided into 24 inches, sometimes in 22 inches. And that makes a difference in the size. So when a carpenter is making a panel to paint on, he would use his meter, and he would produce a panel of the size that he now produces this. The painter would use it. and we would export this to other cities, and other artists would use that taper panel, and we can see that this panel must come from this particular town because of the size. The same can be said with paintings on canvas, because it's not the size of the canvas, but it's the size of the strainer that the canvas is stuck to, which is again made by a carpenter that decides how the size will exactly be. And this research we have applied also to Fabricius, and there we can see that when he moves from one town to another, the size of the works of art do change slightly. Here's an X-ray of one of his paintings of a mythological scene, which is this one. But the reason I show you this X-ray is that we can see that this kind of cusping is only seen on two sides and not on these two sides. They do not show in the X-ray. The reason we can see this in the X-ray, I forgot to tell you, is that when the ground layer is applied over the canvas, it stretches, but as it contains a certain amount of lead white or radio opaque pigments, it will reflect also the surface because they sit down within the knots of the canvas, and it's not the canvas we see, it's the ground layer inside the canvas. So we can see this painting must have been larger on two sides. We can only guess how large, we will never know for sure. Here's the painting as it looks. Here's a self-portrait by Fabricius at a young age, he looks young at least, where he has positioned himself very low in the picture space. He's really down in the bottom, which is pretty odd. And then he's having a what looks like a brick wall here behind him with plaster that has been falling off at various places. And it's painted in a very Rembrandtesque, loose manner. Very sketchy. Very sketchy, and what is extremely nonchalant and what you could say rather flamboyant is painting himself with a shirt open like this. It has never happened in Dutch art before this, that you show yourself and your naked chest with hairs curling out. It seems rather normal nowadays, but definitely not in this particular period here. So that is already making him a little bit outstanding, daring, young, flamboyant painter, with a brush handling and a roughness and a sketchiness that you can see each brushstroke when you are in front of the painting. That makes him unique. Oops, that went very quickly. Here's a painting, and that's the one in Munich, on the white ground, which you cannot see that really. Now the painting could benefit from a varnish removal, but there he is up with a funny hat again. This guy too. This is a very funny shape this hat has, and it has residues of a signature down here. Just a tiny C. I don't know why this one comes like this, but there is just a C, and normally we see his signature as C. Fabricius or Karel Fabricius. So it could have been chopped down or cropped as an image, but now it's centered, this portrait. Is it like the other one down below in the center, that this one would have been, this is probably why I did this, we only see cusping on this side, so it could have been larger on all these sides, and could have been much larger here, which again would position him kind of odd, out of focus again on the surface of the canvas. So he's playing with positioning on the canvas surface in a different way than we have seen earlier on in the 17th century. And we know there is a painting here that by some is thought to be the counterpiece to this. The canvas weaves are very comparable. So some people have speculated, would this originally have been one large canvas? This would be bigger, it's the wrong size here, but could this have been one large painting with Karel Fabricius in the middle and an overpainted background? Some speculation is still going on there, but I doubt it a lot. That would be a little bit odd to have a double portrait sitting so formally, completely unconnected, especially him is disconnected entirely from the woman if we imagine them being within the same canvas. Here's another of Fabricius's early paintings. It's hanging in Boston, where you see an imaginary landscape very heavily built up here, a cow's herd here, very roughly painted. And there were some doubts, and some scholars say this is not Fabricius. We don't believe in this painting. So when I say there are 12 paintings today, then I'm actually revealing already to you the conclusion of this talk, because this one was not thought to be by Fabricius when the exhibition was opened. It was part of the exhibition on Fabricius, and I do recall an elderly professor in art history from the Netherlands who came up to my director at that time, and he scolded him and said, "How can you do this? And you are unprofessional, and this painting is not by Fabricius. It's stupid of you to put it in here, and you should be ashamed of yourself as a scholar." Well, the story continues. A colleague, Gwen Tauber from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, one of the conservators who has been taking care of the paintings you have in your exhibition here, she was asked to study and remove the yellow varnish of this painting here, the portrait of the Potter. It's not to be confused with the artist, de Potter, from the Netherlands, but this is a merchant called de Potter. It's signed at the top, and it also says who it is, and it says G. Fabricius. And here you can see varnish is being removed. The back wall is suddenly becoming a gray wall, and even more surprising, up here in the corner, compared to this, there is a kind of reparation, a restoration of the wall, very roughly done, revealing itself below the signature, which is original. So Fabricius' painting was altered over time, and the back, this entire part of the wall was, before the restoration here, overpainted in between the signature as well, to hide out this, and also hide this nail sitting in the wall as a kind of illusionistic trompe-l'œil, meaning deceiving the eye, sitting in the plaster. And we have no idea, and neither have they at the Rijksmuseum, why anybody would want to paint away this and hide this for the public. It's Abraham de Potter, and he is 56 years of age, and it's painted by Karel Fabricius in 1549, and then an F for fidget. I made this painting. And this came out from the restoration, the illusion of a cracked wall behind this portrait. It has to do with Fabricius maybe being an illusionist. And what I'm showing you here is a small box in the National Museum of Denmark, which was thought to be by Fabricius, but we know now it is not by Fabricius. But just to illustrate the point, Fabricius was known to make trompe-l'œils in his own time. One of the more wealthy people in Delft once asked Fabricius to paint an illusion of a garden view on a wall in his garden, so you could see beyond the wall. And he painted illusions on outside walls that had been chopped down, unfortunately destroyed over time. But he also painted something that's called for illusionistic boxes or peep boxes, where you would look into a space and get the illusion of a three-dimensional room. So 3D at its very first, before you had the funny glasses we use today to look at cinema films. And what you would do here, here you have a window, a piece of glass, and through that you can see the interior of a church, which is painted on two pieces of wood that goes behind like this. It's a triangular box with a flat surface and two walls going backwards like this. And on these walls, this image of a church interior has been painted. But it's only when you look through this little hole here that you get the full illusion of this. And when you bend down and look through here, your nose touches this copper plate. So it has nothing to do with the image, it's simply noses rubbing against a small copper plate sitting here. These two drawers and the feathers and what's hanging here is all painted. It's not sticking out of this carpet, it's simply an illusion of this carpet with things sticking out on the surface. You would go over there and you would look in and you would see this interior. And these two walls will meet in a way, when you look from it at this particular point, as a convincing three-dimensional interior, and you would feel this 3D notion. When you bend down, you will be away from this, and the light will fall in here from the outside and help you to see what's in the inside. Fabricius is known to have painted a large number of these, and the National Gallery in London actually still has one of his peep shows. It's a huge box of an interior of a Dutch room where you can look in at two different holes from either side and get a complete illusion of this interior, which is painted on the walls, on the floor, and up on the other wall. There's no furniture in the room except for what is painted, but when you look at the right spot, it's as if furniture comes out and stands on the floor. This is a drawing, a reconstruction of the front of a triangular box that has an opening, the triangular point towards you. And there's a small hole here to look through, and when you look through it, you see this image here. This image is a small painting, the smallest, one of the smallest he has painted. It's like this in size. It hangs also at the National Gallery in London. And the painting shows the backside of the new church in Delft, with in the foreground a music seller's shop. He sells viola da gambas or mandolins for people coming along. We don't know for sure that it was sitting inside a box like this, because the painting in normal daylight looks like this when it hangs on the wall in the gallery, in the National Gallery. But when it was restored, it must be now 10 or 15 years ago, the canvas that was glued to the back was taken away, and on the back of the original canvas, residues of copper resinate, or copper oleates, copper oleates, composition of oil and copper, and some glue was found. And the reconstruction in our minds of what has happened is that we believe that Fabricius painted this small canvas, which was then glued onto a semicircular sheet of copper that was placed behind a triangular wall. So you would look in, because only by curving, and we've done that with reconstructions of the painting, by curving the painting, the illusion of this image works. Because otherwise there's a very kind of, art perspective in this painting. And it's when looking at the perspectives and the whole notion of perspective, this is something I'll talk about in my last talk, is something that's being elaborated a lot, particularly in this moment in the Netherlands. Well, here is a detail of Hagar, one of the early history paintings that we wanted to look at, where we see the image as it looks to the left, and the background photo here is an infrared image again, where you can see these broad brushstrokes that we already have seen in some of Rembrandt's paintings. We see that his pupil is applying the same kind of rough brushstrokes to indicate the image, and when we take away this one down here, we can see that these brushstrokes are also in here to indicate the form and the face before he starts to apply the paint itself. So, a pupil that learned the trades by Rembrandt, here's a detail of a shoe, which you see here, and some flowers over here, again painted in arabesques in this dark paint that you cannot see when you watch the painting in the gallery, but with infrared light we can reveal all these very quick brushstrokes here that has nothing to do with the direct image of the final image, but is setting up the form and shape before paint layers are being applied over it. And this is the form of a leaf, some leaves down here that are painted on top. We can't see them here as green is not being recorded well in this technique. And you have here other details. Here's this flask standing in the background, and some of the hands. All this is also applied in this very rough, very quick, sketchy manner as an underpaint. Coming back to this painting here, which was not thought to be by Fabricius, we went in and looked at again, is this the way that Fabricius paints? It's a small detail from down here that we look at. Here's a detail, and again we see the same kind of very sketchy, some small changes being applied. And let me say then that when we look at images with X-radiographs, with infrared imaging, I've been presenting it so far as if here we have the truths about what happens. But I must underline that it's also a matter of interpretation, of course. It's also a matter of understanding what you can see with these techniques, with infrareds, with X-rays, but it's also a matter of learning how to see if this is by the same man as the other painting of that infrared. And it is essentially a little bit about the same as the art historians would do when you make a stylistic comparison between two paintings. We are making stylistic comparison of some of the materials in here that depict themselves in certain ways. So it's not free from being interpretations, or you could say connoisseurship in a different way, using a different material. Here's a detail of one of the background figures in this painting. As you see, very roughly sketched, a nose here and a turban, hand down in the wash basin, and a funny hand lying down here. Very sketchy, not very precise in anatomy. And another painting in the show showed a comparable woman, but after all, quite differently painted. This painting here shows a domestic interior, which was included in the exhibition under the recommendation of somebody who was not involved in the actual setting up of the show, believing that this was also by Fabricius. However, by comparing these images and the way that they have been created, we are pretty convinced that they do not match each other in technique or brush handling. So while being introduced as attributed to Fabricius in the exhibition, it left the exhibition as not by Fabricius. Here we have the even younger Rembrandt. He's returning again and again today. And the reason he does is that also looking at him with infrared, which I have done and showed you a number of times, reveals not only the scratching here, which is fabulous, I think, like you saw it in the beard of the dead body on the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. You can sense it here, and you can see by scratching, like making sgraffito, you get the underlying paint come out where you scratch away the wet paint, so that the light color of the background suddenly comes out and makes these hairs look as if they stick out in front of the head, but they in fact scratched into the wet paint. And this is what we see in the X-ray. But what we also see is what we saw a little bit on that portrait from Nuremberg, that the shadow area of the face is kind of spotty or blotchy, and you see some light tones shimmer through. That identified partly that this could be by Rembrandt. And here is Gerrit Douw in a painting in Kassel of an old man, and also an infrared image of a painting, and there's nothing in the shadow area here that looks any way like this. So Rembrandt's first pupil, Gerrit Douw, who became a very delicate and fine painter, he definitely does not use that same sketchy technique in painting. Jan Lievens was a contemporary with Rembrandt in Leiden. They were two artists competing to be the best in history painting. And the art advisor to the stadtholder, or the governor of the Netherlands, Constantine Huygens, when they were both Rembrandt and Lievens working in Leiden, said to the governor, beware of these two artists, they're going to be great artists, and especially Jan Lievens, he's going to be the best. He is definitely brilliant too, but I think we all know Rembrandt as the better one now. But also he, although working together, seeing each other's works, being in dialogue as young painters, they paint entirely different. There's nothing in the shadow areas of this face that has the same character of this one. And looking into more details of the proposed Fabricius, this is just a background image, and you see the same here. We see so much more about what goes on, the brush strokes here, which are in here below, the paint layer to tell us more about the painting style of the artist. So developing a certain connoisseurship in understanding an artist's layer build-up is essential to really understand these details and the brush handling, like the signatures that we talked about earlier. It doesn't make much sense to see these images, so I will skip this one again because they are much too detailed and have very little narrative. Here's the head of a bull, which is lying here, and you see the brushwork here. It's extremely vivid, something you cannot see from this dark area here, which is here, and down here, which is down here. The infrared image really tells you so much about what goes on. Not only looking for underdrawings, which was the initial idea of using infrared imaging when it was developed throughout the 70s and 80s, but looking into the under-modelings, the brush handlings below the surface offers so much information. Another small detail where you see scratches in the wet paint in this area here, which has no significance at all on the surface. It happened below at one point and was painted over. But it reveals a little bit about what this artist is working with. Here again you see something lying down here, which is not visible on the surface, but in the underpaint, undermodeling, in the handling, in the way that this particular artist is working. This painting has not been completely interpreted. We don't know what it shows, apart from we can see that it's a woman lying close to some water being reflected here, and we have a big umbrella, but nobody really has interpreted. There's a peacock standing here behind, and there's a dog running there. Looking at it with infrared, we discovered that there originally was a man running in the background. A man with a big beret and a fine face with two eyes and a mouth and a jacket. And what he had originally been doing there, we don't know either. But maybe that's a clue to understanding the scene. Is it a Bathsheba being spied upon, or is it a Hera being spied upon? We don't know for sure. But it was kind of a surprise to see this man popping up when we made the infrared image. Also, this painting, to return to it again, has information below the surface. When we look at it infrared, we can see that the person was sitting up here originally, and now he's sitting down here. But it was apparently maybe a standing person, and we also see a very fine pencil drawing of the entire composition. The trees up here has been drawn with a very fine pen on this small canvas before Fabricius, who signed it here, carefully drew this painting. We didn't see any underdrawing in the other paintings, only the undermodeling. This painting hanging in Schwerin in Germany is also fully signed down here, Karl Fabricius, of a soldier sitting, falling asleep just in front of the city gates. You may assume that this is kind of a wall, and here is the city gate where you can lock down and up here you have this pig and a man, so it's probably Saint Antonius, one of the Christian saints. So it's probably Saint Antonius' door or archway, and it has been looked for, and historians have been searching all over in the Netherlands, where is there a Saint Antonius archway, and they found one in a village where Fabricius probably has never been, but maybe he was there after all, and has used this as a backdrop. There's a funny entrance up here, and very strange having a column like this just in front of an archway. So there's something in the perspective that is kind of surprising. And looking at it again in infrared, we discovered that there are some changes going on, but the most important change is that here there's some form appearing that we at first couldn't understand, but after the cleaning of the painting and an overpaint, we see the legs of a man walking in boots and having a dagger hanging down next to him, walking on top of this wall, which is how the painting looks today. The funny thing is that this figure having been cut off like this, but walking in there, is very strange. And at first the director of the museum said, cover it up again, we don't want to see this. It looks too stupid, this painting is fine as it is. What is this funny figure doing here? And she had an argument, we thought, because what I'm showing you here now on the next slide, this here is an aquarelle, or rather a gouache, after this painting, and you don't see this man. And this gouache was painted sometime in the late in the 18th century, early 19th century, after the painting. So it could be, but you see, this gouache has no dog sitting down here, which the painting has. So is this gouache now really true to what is being copied? We know of this copy because it's in archival material that it was made by, we know the artist, I forgot it unfortunately, but we know it was made. But why would he make a copy of this painting here without the dog? And it's definitely not without this man. So first we thought, well, this man is not here in the copy of the painting, it should be gone again. It must be somebody who's been playing a trick on us. But looking at this drawing now with infrared reveals the shape of a dog. It was there in the first version of this copy, but whoever made the copy didn't want that dog to be there. We didn't see that figure either, but we see some preparatory drawing here of the composition. So we shouldn't always believe copies either, as you understand. And this copy apparently was not a true version of the painting, omitting the dog. There are slightly small changes otherwise. And the painting, oh, there he went out. The painting really should have this person here, and this is how it's being showed in Schwerin now. We have no idea why it was painted away. We know that the paint that was used to paint it over was a mixture of lead white as well, so it has been early on in history probably. But Fabricius apparently intended it to be there, and that was in this case again chosen to leave it visible to the public. This looks pretty boring. It's going to be less boring in a minute, because this is an area of one of the paintings that was not thought to be by Fabricius. But with infrared image, we see the signature. Karel, and then you see here, Fabricius, it says Fabricius, large F here, Fabricius, very neatly spelled, in the wet paint below the surface, like the underdrawings and like the other scrapings. Apparently, Fabricius did sign this painting before he then finished it entirely off, and he didn't put the final signature on it. So in this case, we really discovered the signature, confirming the art historical attribution of this painting to Fabricius. And we have a number of his signatures here on the known paintings. Here was the one that came out after the restoration of the portrait of the potter. Here's one from the music seller's shop. And here are the last ones from 1654, from the Goldfinch. Here's just a C dot from that painting of a portrait in Munich, where we expect that the canvas must have been larger and there could have been a full signature. And then we found a signature on the painting that nobody thought was by Fabricius, where this art historian argued with my director at that time that he shouldn't have included the painting. We can see the name Fabricius being written here very faintly, but it's clearly that there is Fabricius' name. We see it in the infrared I just showed you, and there's another painting, this one here, with Hera. There we didn't find a final signature, but the attribution is too close to the other ones. So during the exhibition, we found 2 more signatures, by allowing the lenders to the exhibition to examine the paintings while they were on show. Now, just a brief story about the Goldfinch. Most of you know this painting. This is what it looked like until 2003. On a panel, single wooden panel, with unpainted black borders, and an X-ray of it, or rather a computer tomography of the painting revealed more. Well, the X-ray was not very brilliant because you see mainly the lead white from the background, which is covering up information about what may be below that background. The question was, why is there black borders on some sides and not on all the way around? And why would an artist at all paint a bird sitting on a box with food for the bird like this? What is the idea of this? In the 17th century, the goldfinch was known to be very easy to learn tricks. You could learn the goldfinch to open the lid and find its own food and close the lid again. You see, he's having a chain sitting here to his leg, so he cannot fly away. You could learn a goldfinch to go down on a lower level and maybe from a source here find water and drink this. This means that this could be an allegory of the labor of being on Earth. You have to work all the time to get your food. But is this the case? So we wanted, or the art historians needed us to examine it further to understand if it has been cut out of a larger piece, if it was just a fragment of a larger painting. This is why we put it through this tomograph in a hospital in Amersfoort to get a better image of what's going on. And what we could get out of this is hopefully coming when I press the button. Yes, when we in this kind of, which is kind of an X-ray, when you have this, you get slices of the painting which you can turn in different angles, and you can kind of visualize what happens behind the paint layer. And here we have the same painting, but we have eliminated on the computer screen the paint layer, and we see the panel. And what is striking here are a lot of small holes up here. Some of them are on the back, some are on the front, or have been on the front. We see small nails in some of the corners. And we see a hole here, which you also see on the side. There's a small round hole, which indicates that this was originally part of a much larger panel, which must have had a dowel to be two pieces of wood that's been glued together. So it was originally larger, but has been cut down at some point. However, some of these small nails do stick out on the front when we looked carefully, and might indicate, though, that the format was not changed when this motif was made, but it probably was a reuse of a larger board that was, after it has broken or whatever, was reused in a smaller format. Here's a reconstruction of what the painting may have looked like at an earlier stage, with a larger black border painted all the way along, and the bottom ring here was not, in the first version that Fabricius painted, was not present. In the second version, which is the painting we have now, he added this second ring, which you just see a fragment of the highlight here at a lower level, to change the I'll walk back to it, to change the illusion, this one. You can see also it's partly transparent, so you can look through it and see the box being painted first below. We can only speculate with our collaborators in the art historical department about why this was added, but when you look at the perspective, you can see that it indicates that this painting should be seen from below. It should be hanging high on the wall, so you look up below these two rings, and maybe this ring was added to accentuate that it was hanging high on the wall, because the upper ring wouldn't give that illusion completely. We don't know, but that is significant in understanding the function of the painting, that it really was sitting high where the bird would be sitting in. There are other paintings of birds, of goldfinches from the periods where you see them hanging, sitting on a similar way outside a window, and you see a wife sticking her head out and pouring water in a small jar for the bird. Well, having looked at Fabricius until 1654, when he dies, and the bright paint, the light ground layers, the bright paintings he produces at the end, is what made scholars believe that there was a link to Vermeer and his very illuminous and bright paintings. But this painting by Vermeer is from 1662, 1665, so considerably after Fabricius painted his painting. Fabricius worked in Delft, so did Vermeer, and that's why the link is so easy to make, or so tempting to make. But when Vermeer started out, he started entirely different, and we will return to this. Here we have the proud young Fabricius, just before he dies, and he has had a horrible death, because he died in an explosion. There was a huge explosion in Delft, just next to where his studio was, and when the smoke has disappeared, half of the city was destroyed. And it was destroyed because there was a huge reservoir of gunpowder for the fights that the Dutch were having to protect their 7 regions. So it was simply gunpowder and shells and cannonballs and whatever that went up in a huge explosion. Fabricius was dragged out of his studio. He was still alive, but he died within a few hours after he was dragged out. So unfortunately, one of the probably most brilliant pupils of Rembrandt never got a long career and never had a chance to evolve. This is Egbert van der Poel, another of the Rembrandt period painters that depicted this, which was extremely famous happening or tragedy in the period. A lot of paintings depict this catastrophe in Delft. And looking carefully at the bird, Goldfinch, we see small indentations in the paint layer, which indicates that the paint layer must have been still wet when these indentations were made. So, to continue speculating, we may speculate that this painting of the Goldfinch, which is also signed Fabricius and 1654, may have witnessed this explosion, must be hanging in the studio when the whole house was collapsing, fragments was hitting this painting and made indentations in the wet paint. So maybe this quiet bird, if he could speak, would be able to tell us much more about how Fabricius' studio would have been working. During the study of Fabricius and his techniques, we also had colleagues working on another of the painters, Albert Cuyp. You have a huge painting by Albert Cuyp here in your exhibition as well, also showing animals in front of the waters of Dordrecht, south of The Hague, where Albert Cuyp was painting a lot of his paintings. And Albert Cuyp in these paintings used a special blue pigment called blue ochre, which sounds like a contradiction because ochre has the color of ochre. But there's something called blue ochre, which is a hydrated iron phosphate, which you find close to organic material in the ground. Blue earth, it's also called. And there's an area outside Haarlem where it's supposed to have found blue earth that artists could use as a very cheap substitute for blue pigments, where you didn't want to have a lot of blue but still want to have the hue of blue. Also in southern part of Germany, you might be able to find what's called blue earth, which by some, when you find it in an archival source, see blue earth, you would think of maybe azurite, which is rock particles from mountains, so mountain blue, blue earth. But it could also be this kind of blue ochre, and we saw it also in these two paintings of Fabricius, the self-portrait and in the music seller's shop. It has been associated with earlier periods of painting, but never with 17th century painting to any degree. But we found in these two paintings, and thanks to collaboration with colleagues at the National Gallery in London, Marika Spring, more paintings with this particular blue pigment has been discovered. Well, you have seen so much of me today, so now I'm also showing myself on the screen. While I do this is because the restoration of the Goldfinch, which you see here on the easel, was taking place in the gallery of the museum in the Mauritshuis, where we, by treating the painting, removing the varnish layer, filling in the holes, and preparing our extended knowledge with historians, scientists, and conservators together, we want to share this with the public. We had a small vitrine in the foreground here with some materials that you would use for conservation treatment and materials that would be references to the techniques and materials of the 17th century artists. And it was fascinating over a period of 6 weeks. It's a small painting, so I only worked a few hours every day. But over this period, with the documentary evidence on the walls about what we were doing, the public could see me via a camera to my microscope and see exactly what was going on in my hands while standing in front of it. It was extremely well received by the public. And what maybe is the main thing about this is not to make a show off about what a conservator may be able to do, but to share with the public the delicacy and the intimacy with which one gets in contact with a piece of art while doing this kind of treatment. And also explaining to them that when there is this profound change from having a yellow wall to a white, cool wall behind the Goldfinch, then there is a reason for this. It's not just magic, it's not just change, so I can't recognize it, what happened. It's really a matter of trying to explain that artworks have histories and they change over time. People alter them and they alter by themselves by various means. And by doing this, and actually this woman standing here, she came every day all 6 weeks to follow the process. And she is actually an author, and she writes poems as well, and she wrote a poem about this. But if you can capture the public about this kind of material aspects about our heritage, you get a much wider audience to appreciate old master paintings than just having a show on, which is sometimes difficult for a contemporary audience to understand when the artworks are 300 or 400 or 500 years old. So we see it as a key issue in our work also in Copenhagen, to inform, and that is what CATS is supposed to do as well, to inform the public, because by informing the public about the fragility and the sensitivity of artworks, also politicians will begin to understand this, and that may prompt more financial means to taking care of our cultural heritage. And I think we all need this in one another way.